Demo video number 2, expressive brush painting technique. So for this technique, there's some similarities and some differences with the gradient, right? We looked at the gradient already. It is smooth application. It's mixing colors on the canvas while it's wet. It's layering highlights and shadows on top of each other. Expressive still starts with base colors, but instead of the smooth transitions and smooth surfaces, we are going for a loaded, layered brush stroke that still follows the contour. And we're going to leave those exaggerated brush strokes and textures in our image. So I'm going to do the same object, just so we've got a compare and contrast, right? And it's still the same color theory as before, right? Cool shadows, warm highlights. This technique is going to take a lot more paint and a lot more brush cleaning. So I will tell you, anytime you are not using a brush, it needs to be in your water, because acrylic is basically colored plastic. And if it dries in your bristle, that brush is ruined. There's no getting the paint back out of it like with a tempera paint. All right, so I'm going to do the same red apple. I'm going to do the cool side with the cast shadow and the warm highlight, and then the two-tone in the leaf. So I'm going to start with the leaf in this one, and I'm going to start with my green base just while I've got it before it dries, right? Probably want to make a little more. Don't forget, you always clean your brush before pulling new paint and mixing it somewhere else on your palette paper. All right. So I've got that nice thick texture. I turn my brush handle as I go. I leave those short brush strokes there. All right. I'm going to grab a smaller brush here. There we go. Just because that stem is pretty skinny. So now I'm going to go back in with that blue, and I'm going to add those brush strokes right into the green. And I'm leaving some of that so that we see those brush strokes. This is what Impressionist painters were doing, right? They were focusing on the shadows and the lights and the darks. I'm going to do the same thing with a yellow and a white on this side. And as the paint starts to blend together on your brush, I'm going to clean some of that out, grab a new load of paint there. There we go. So that I can see the yellow and the white streaks with the green underneath. And a little white and green at the top. Dry your brush off really good between layers of colors so that it doesn't thin it out. Again, if you need to go back in with some of your base color, you can, just to keep that textured, loaded look. I'm going to go in with some blues. So they're still following the contour. They're still going to change directions. but it is definitely a looser painting technique, a more expressive, right? All right, so now I'm going to go back to the big brush, and I'm going to load 1/2 of the apple first. I'm going to start by defining that outline with the edge of my brush. Got a loose bristle there. If you get that, you can pull that out or cut it. All right, got a nice thick load of red. Now I'm going to go back in with the smaller brush, take out just some straight blue. The more strokes I make, the more purple it becomes. If you get too much of that cool color in, go back in with some more of your base color. Again, be sure the brush is dry. Load the brush some more with that red. Nice thick application. And again, when I'm doing this, I'll turn the brush each time so I can get 3 or 4 loaded strokes before I have to go add more paint again. And that's going to keep it nice and thick. And you want to exaggerate it. You want the cools bolder and darker than they were with the gradient. All right, so now I'm going to clean my brush. I'm going to go back to the big brush. I'm going to load this half of it, define my edge. Put that in some water. Now I'm going to go in and load the small brush again with the yellow. All right, 2 or 3 strokes at a time. Turning the brush as I go. Lighten it up with some white highlight in there. And then I'm going to go back in with some red and transition back into that highlight, just so it's more subtle. For the shadow, I'm going to go ahead and load it with some white. Just a little bit. Notice I'm following the contour of the table. So my brush strokes go horizontal here. My shadow is darker up underneath the edge of the apple, so my blue strokes are going to be thicker there. And it's going to fade as it works its way out. So that got a little too smooth right there. So my last step here is going to be to go back in and add some more of those expressive, thick, layered brush strokes in there. All right, so now you've got a compare and contrast between the gradient and the expressive.